During the handover of the keys to her new house, my daughter looked at me and said, "You were never part of this story. Stay out of it." I left without saying a word. I had secretly paid the down payment. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The realtor's smile faded as she witnessed the exchange. My daughter Aria stood there, the keys clutched tightly in her hand, her eyes cold and distant. My chest tightened as I turned away, the weight of her words crushing me more than any physical blow could. 30 years of rejection, and it still felt like the first time. As soon as I reached my car, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed the bank. "This is Donna Reynolds. I need to cancel a transfer I made last week," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. "The down payment for the property on Maple Street?" the banker asked. "Yes. Is it too late?" I held my breath. "We can still stop it, Mrs. Reynolds. The funds haven't been fully processed yet." Relief washed over me. "But may I ask why? This is quite unusual." I looked back at the house where Aria was now taking photos with her husband, their faces bright with excitement. She had no idea the money had come from me. "The recipient doesn't want my help," I said simply. The silent drive home to my small apartment was filled with memories I'd spent decades trying to bury. Aria at 3, crying as they took her away from me. The court hearings. The accusations. The way my ex-husband's mother, Irene, had looked at me with such contempt as she gained custody of my baby. "She needs stability," the judge had said. "In your condition, Mrs. Reynolds, you cannot provide that." My condition. As if postpartum depression was a choice I'd made. As if I'd chosen to be so overwhelmed with darkness that I couldn't get out of bed some days, couldn't stop crying, couldn't be the mother I desperately wanted to be. By the time I was better, by the time the medications and therapy had pulled me back from the edge, it was too late. Aria was calling Irene Mama, and I was just the unstable woman who had given birth to her. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car, unable to move. For years I had tried to reconnect with Aria. Birthday cards returned unopened. Phone calls unanswered. The court-ordered visitations where she would sit silently, counting the minutes until she could leave. And then as she got older, her outright refusal to see me at all. Still, I had never stopped trying. Even when my ex-husband died when Aria was 12. Even when the court battles intensified as Irene fought to maintain full custody, I kept reaching out. A mother doesn't stop being a mother, even when her child doesn't want her to be. Inside my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, eyeing the photo albums that sat on my coffee table. Carefully compiled over the years, they contained what little I had of Aria's childhood. School photos I'd requested from her teachers, newspaper clippings of her high school debate team victories, a graduation announcement that had mistakenly been sent to me. And now at 33, Aria was buying her first home. I had found out through a mutual acquaintance, had transferred the money anonymously through my lawyer. I thought perhaps this once I could help her without her knowing, could be part of her life in some small invisible way. What a fool I had been. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was my lawyer, Michael. "Donna? The bank called me. They said you're canceling the transfer." "Yes," I said, my voice hollow. "She doesn't want my help, Michael. She made that very clear." He sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Donna. I really thought this might be different." "So did I," I whispered, a tear sliding down my cheek. "So did I." After we hung up, I opened one of the albums. There she was, my beautiful daughter at 16, accepting a science award. Her smile was wide, her eyes bright with accomplishment. Irene stood beside her, beaming with pride. I had sat in the back of the auditorium that day, unseen, my heart both swelling with pride and breaking with longing. My finger traced the outline of Aria's face in the photo. "I never abandoned you," I whispered. "No matter what they told you, I never stopped fighting for you." But fighting for her and actually being there for her were two different things. And now, after all these years, maybe it was time to accept that some wounds never heal. That some relationships cannot be salvaged. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time to fight in a different way. To finally tell her the truth. All of it. And let her decide for herself what our relationship should be. I picked up my phone again, a new resolve steadying my hand. This time I wouldn't retreat into the shadows of my pain. This time I would step into the light of truth. no matter how much it hurt. The morning after the house incident, I woke with swollen eyes and a decision. For 30 years I had lived as a ghost in my daughter's life, present but unseen, hovering at the edges of her world. No more. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my small kitchen table, watching the early morning light filter through the curtains. My hand still shook slightly as I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Dr. Winter's office," said a young voice on the other end. "This is Donna Reynolds. I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Winters, please." There was a pause. "Ms. Reynolds? Oh, Dr. Winters will be so pleased. She just mentioned you last week." My heart warmed at the thought. Patricia Winters had been my therapist during the darkest period of my life. She had guided me through the fog of postpartum depression, had stood as a witness in court when I fought for custody, had held my hand when I lost. 2 days later, I sat in her familiar office, surrounded by the same soothing blue walls and comfortable furniture. Patricia herself looked older, her dark hair now streaked with silver, fine lines etched around her eyes, but her smile was just as kind. "Donna," she said warmly, "it's been too long." 5 years, I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Not since Aria's wedding." Patricia nodded, her expression softening. "The one you weren't invited to." The words still had the power to hurt, even after all this time. I had watched from my car, parked across the street from the church, as my daughter emerged in a beautiful white gown, Irene adjusting her veil with motherly pride. "I saw Aria yesterday," I said, my voice catching. "She's buying a house." I tried to help. Anonymously. Patricia listened as I recounted the previous day's events, her face revealing nothing but compassionate attention. "And now?" she asked when I finished. "What do you want to happen now, Donna?" I stared at my hands twisting in my lap. I want her to know the truth. Not the version Irene has been feeding her all these years, but what really happened. How hard I fought for her. How much I've always loved her. Patricia leaned forward. "And how do you plan to tell her this truth?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Every time I've tried to talk to her, she shuts me down. She won't listen." "Then perhaps," Patricia said gently, "she needs to read it instead." That afternoon I started the letter. Words poured out of me like a dam breaking. 30 years of silence, truths finally finding voice. I wrote about the joy of Aria's birth, the darkness that followed, the desperate fight to get well for her sake. I detailed the court battles, the manipulation by her father and Irene, the years of reaching out only to be pushed away. "They told you I abandoned you," I wrote, tears blurring my vision. "But the truth is, they took you from me, and they made sure you would never want to come back." It took 3 days to finish. 3 days of excavating old wounds, of reliving moments so painful I had locked them away in the deepest corners of my mind. When I was done, I sealed the letter in an envelope and drove to Aria's new neighborhood. The house looked different now. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, men carrying furniture inside. Aria stood on the porch directing them, a clipboard in hand. She looked so much like me at that age. The same determined set to her jaw, the same way of tucking her hair behind her ear when concentrating. I parked across the street, the letter heavy in my hand. Could I really do this? Walk up to her and hand her 30 years of pain and truth? What right did I have to disrupt her life this way? As I hesitated, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello." I answered, still watching Aria. "Mrs. Reynolds? This is Samantha from Clearview Nursing Home. I'm calling about Irene Matthews." My blood ran cold. "Irene? What about her?" "She's been admitted to our facility. She specifically asked us to contact you." I frowned, confused. "She asked for me? Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. She's been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and her grandson-in-law made the arrangements. She was quite insistent about speaking with you. Irene wanted to see me. After all these years, after everything she had done to keep Aria from me, she was asking for me now? It had to be a trick." "Mrs. Reynolds? Are you still there?" I watched as Aria laughed at something one of the movers said, her face lighting up in a way I rarely got to see. "What time are visiting hours?" I heard myself ask. That evening, I drove to Clearview, the letter to Aria still in my purse. The facility was nice, bright and clean, with friendly staff who directed me to room 214. My heart pounded as I approached the door, my palms sweating. I hadn't seen Irene in years, not since the last custody hearing when Aria was 15. I knocked softly and entered to find a diminished version of the woman who had dominated so much of my life. Irene sat in an armchair by the window, a blanket over her knees despite the warm evening. Her once imperious posture was now stooped, her sharp features softened by age. She looked up as I entered, her eyes, so like my ex-husband's, narrowing slightly. "You came," she said, her voice raspier than I remembered. "You asked for me," I replied, staying near the door. "Why?" Irene gestured weakly to the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Donna. We have much to discuss." Cautiously, I took the seat, keeping my purse with Aria's letter close to my side. "I'm dying," Irene said bluntly. "Not immediately, but soon enough. And I find that approaching death has a way of clarifying things." I said nothing, waiting. "You think I hate you," she continued. "And perhaps I did once. But the truth is more complicated." "The truth usually is," I said softly. She sighed, looking out the window at the setting sun. "I believed I was protecting Aria. My son, your ex-husband, convinced me you were unstable, dangerous even. I thought I was saving my grandchild. And later," I asked, my voice tight, "when I got better, when the doctors confirmed I was well, when the court granted me visitation rights that you consistently undermined." Irene's gaze returned to me, something like shame flickering across her face. "By then it was too late. Aria was mine. I couldn't bear to share her." The admission hung in the air between us, devastating in its simple selfishness. "Do you know what you took from us?" I whispered, tears threatening. "From both of us?" Irene closed her eyes briefly. "I'm beginning to understand. That's why I asked you here." She reached for a drawer in the side table, pulling out a thick envelope. "These are for you. Letters, photos, drawings, things Aria made for you over the years. Things I kept from you." My hands trembled as I took the envelope, scarcely able to believe what I was hearing. "Why now?" I managed to ask. "Because," Irene said, her voice suddenly fragile, "I need you to help Aria when I'm gone. And for that to happen, she needs to know the truth." The envelope Irene had given me felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I waited until I was home, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, before I dared to open it. Inside were dozens of items meticulously organized by year. A crayon drawing of two stick figures labeled "Me" and "Real Mom" in wobbly 5-year-old handwriting. A Mother's Day card addressed to me but never sent. School photos with "For Mommy" written on the back, then crossed out. Letters, so many letters, in Aria's evolving penmanship, from childish scrawl to elegant cursive. My hand shook as I unfolded the first one. "Dear Mommy, Grandma says you are sick and can't see me. I hope you feel better soon. I miss you." Tears splashed onto the paper, and I hastily moved it aside, afraid of damaging this precious artifact of my daughter's heart. I read through letter after letter, each one piercing me with what might have been. "Dear Mom, I'm 10 today. Grandma says you don't want to come to my party, but I saved you a piece of cake anyway. Dear Mother, I won the science fair today. Dad would have been proud. I wish you could have seen it. Dear Donna, I don't know why I'm still writing these. Grandma's right, if you wanted to be in my life you would be. This is the last one." That final letter was dated just before Aria's 16th birthday. She'd stopped believing in me then, stopped hoping I would somehow break through the barriers Irene had erected between us. The truth hit me with crushing force. Aria had wanted me. She had reached out time and again, only to be told I didn't care enough to respond. While I had been fighting through courts and sending gifts that never arrived, Irene had been intercepting our attempts to connect, ensuring that the divide between us grew ever wider. I gathered the letters, holding them to my chest as if I could absorb the years of lost love through simple contact. Dawn was breaking by the time I finished reading everything, my eyes raw from crying, my heart simultaneously broken and somehow strengthened by what I'd discovered. My phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Michael, my lawyer. "Donna, I've got some news," he said without preamble. "Aria's house is back on the market." I frowned, confused. "What?" "But she just moved in yesterday." "Not according to the listing. It went up late last night. Priced to sell quickly. My mind raced. That doesn't make sense. She was so excited about that house. There's more, Michael said, his voice hesitant. I did some digging. Aria and her husband filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. The news hit me like a physical blow. My daughter was going through one of the most painful experiences of her life, and I hadn't known. I was still an outsider, learning about her pain through second-hand sources. Donna? Are you there? Yes, I managed. Where is she staying now? With Irene, according to my contact at the clerk's office. The divorce filing lists Irene's address as her current residence. Of course, even now, even as an adult facing hardship, Aria would turn to the woman who had raised her. The woman who had poisoned her against me. Thank you, Michael, I said. I need to go. I spent the morning composing a new letter to Aria, incorporating what I'd learned from Irene's collection. I wrote of my desperation to connect with her, my unending love, the cruel machinations that had kept us apart. I included copies of court documents showing my fight for custody, medical records proving my recovery, even receipts for gifts I'd sent that she'd never received. But as I prepared to deliver it, doubt crept in. Would Aria even read it? Or would she tear it up, dismissing it as the desperate lies of a woman she'd been taught to distrust? And what about Irene? She was dying, yes, but she was still the only mother Aria had ever known. Did I have the right to shatter that relationship, especially when Aria was already dealing with the collapse of her marriage? The nursing home was quiet when I arrived that afternoon. Irene was asleep, her breathing shallow, her once imposing presence diminished by illness and age. I sat beside her bed, the letter to Aria clutched in my hand. I read everything, I said softly, not sure if she could hear me. All these years, you let her believe I didn't want her. Irene's eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with surprising clarity. Not didn't want, she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. Couldn't handle. There's a difference. Not to a child there isn't, I replied, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. She sighed, closing her eyes briefly. I know. That's why I called you here. She gestured weakly to the bedside table. There's something else. Something you need to see. I opened the drawer and found a thick manila folder. Inside were financial documents, bank statements, investment reports, property deeds. I don't understand, I said, frowning at the papers. Aria's husband, Irene explained, each word clearly an effort. He's been stealing from her. From both of us. The divorce. It's bad, Donna. Worse than she knows. I scanned the documents with growing horror. Jason, Aria's husband of 3 years, had systematically drained their joint accounts, taken loans against their house, even accessed Irene's retirement funds using forged documents. Does Aria know about this? I asked, my protective instincts flaring. Irene shook her head slightly. Not the extent. She knows. He cheated. Knows he lied about some things. But this, she gestured to the papers, would destroy her. She trusted him. Completely. Why show me this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Because, Irene said, meeting my gaze steadily, she needs her mother now. Her real mother. The words I'd waited 30 years to hear, coming from the last person I'd expected to say them. Will you tell her? I asked. About the letters about keeping us apart? Irene closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her wrinkled cheek. I've tried. She won't believe me. Thinks it's the dementia talking. She opened her eyes again, fixing me with an intense stare. That's why I need you to help her. Without telling her I sent you. I looked down at my letter, suddenly understanding it wasn't the right approach. Aria wouldn't believe accusations against the grandmother who had raised her, especially coming from the mother she'd been taught to distrust. I'll help her, I promised, tucking the letter back into my purse. But I'll do it my way. Finding a way to help Aria without revealing Irene's involvement required careful planning. For 2 days, I consulted with Michael, reviewing the financial documents Irene had given me. The picture they painted was grim. Jason had not only drained their accounts but had also left Aria with significant debt. We could set up a trust, Michael suggested. Anonymous donor, strict conditions that the money can only be used for specific purposes. I shook my head. She'd never accept it. She's too proud. Just like me, I thought but didn't say. Then what's your plan? Michael asked, his frustration evident. I smiled, an idea forming. I'm going to visit my former mother-in-law. Irene was having a good day when I arrived at Clearview. She sat in a wheelchair by the window, watching birds at a feeder, her face more animated than I'd seen it recently. You're back, she said, not sounding entirely displeased. I need your help, I replied, taking the seat across from her. I want to help Aria, but she won't accept anything directly from me. Irene studied me, her eyes narrowing slightly. What did you have in mind? I need you to convince her to accept financial assistance from an investment group. One that doesn't actually exist. A shadow of the old, calculating Irene flickered across her face. You want me to lie to her? Isn't that what you've been doing for 30 years? I countered, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Irene flinched but didn't argue. Fair enough. But why would she believe this particular story? Because it will come from you, I explained. And because I've created an impeccable paper trail. I showed her the documents Michael had prepared. A letter from a fictional investment firm offering settlement money from a class action lawsuit against a bank where Aria had briefly held an account in college. It's a small enough amount to be believable, but enough to help her get back on her feet, I explained. All you have to do is tell her it came for her while she was at work, and that you think she should accept it. Irene studied the documents, nodding slowly. It might work. She looked up at me, something like respect in her eyes. You've thought this through. I've had 30 years to learn how to be invisible in my daughter's life, I said quietly. This is just one more invisible gift. 3 days later, Michael called to confirm that Aria had deposited the check. My plan was working. She had accepted the money, believing it to be rightfully hers. It wasn't everything she needed, but it would help with immediate expenses while she navigated her divorce. What I hadn't planned on was running into Aria herself at Clearview the following week. I was just leaving Irene's room when I nearly collided with her in the hallway. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair hastily pulled back in a messy ponytail. Beautiful despite it all. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in shock. What are you doing here? I fumbled for a response. I heard Irene was ill. I wanted to check on her. Why? Aria demanded, suspicion hardening her features. Why would you care about her condition? Because she was important to you, I said simply. And anything that affects you matters to me. Aria stared at me, clearly caught off guard by my honesty. You have no right to be here, she said finally, but the words lacked their usual venom. Probably not, I agreed. But here I am anyway. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I noticed she was carrying a small overnight bag and several pharmacy packages. Are you staying here? I asked, nodding toward her luggage. She hesitated before answering. Just for tonight. The nurses are short-staffed, and Grandma had a bad episode yesterday. I took a chance. Have you had dinner? The cafeteria here is surprisingly good. Aria looked like she was about to refuse, but then her shoulders sagged slightly. I haven't eaten since breakfast, she admitted. My treat, I offered, hardly daring to breathe as I waited for her response. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. Fine. But just dinner. The cafeteria was nearly empty at that hour. We sat at a corner table with our trays, the silence between us thick with 30 years of unspoken words. Aria picked at her salad, avoiding my gaze. I heard about your divorce, I said finally, deciding directness might be best. I'm sorry you're going through that. Her head snapped up, eyes flashing. How did you know about that? I winced internally, realizing my mistake. Small town, I said vaguely. News travels. She seemed to accept this, returning her attention to her salad. It doesn't matter. I'm fine. You don't have to be, I said gently. Divorce is hard. Even when it's the right decision. Aria's fork paused midway to her mouth. You'd know all about that, wouldn't you? Since you left my father. The accusation was familiar. Irene's version of events, no doubt. I chose my words carefully. Is that what you believe happened? It's what I know happened, she replied, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. You left us. You couldn't handle being a mother. I took a deep breath. That's not true, Aria. But I don't think you're ready to hear what really happened. She laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. Of course. You're the victim, right? Poor Donna, misunderstood and maligned. No, I said quietly. There were no victims, only people who made mistakes. Including me. Something in my tone must have reached her because she fell silent, studying me with new intensity. For a brief moment I thought she might actually be ready to listen. But then her phone rang, breaking the fragile connection. I have to take this, she said after checking the screen. It's my lawyer. I nodded, watching as she stepped away to answer the call. Her body language shifted as she spoke, shoulders tensing, free hand clenching into a fist. Whatever news she was receiving, it wasn't good. When she returned to the table, her face was pale. I have to go, she said, gathering her things. Jason's contesting the divorce settlement. He's making claims. What kind of claims? I asked, alarmed by her expression. Aria hesitated, clearly debating whether to confide in me. He's saying I was unstable, that I had violent episodes. Her voice cracked slightly. He's using my family history against me, saying mental illness runs in my blood, saying I'm just like me, I finished quietly. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I need to go. As she turned to leave, I made a split-second decision. Aria, wait. I have something that might help. She paused, looking back with wary eyes. Medical records, I said. Mine. They prove I was never violent, never a danger to anyone, only suffering from postpartum depression that went untreated too long. I pulled a card from my purse, Dr. Winter's business card. This doctor has all my files. She can testify that what Jason is claiming about genetic mental illness is nonsense. Aria took the card reflexively, staring at it as if it might bite her. Why would you help me? Because you're my daughter, I said simply. And I have 30 years of mothering to make up for. She slipped the card into her pocket without comment and walked away. But she didn't throw it out and she didn't give it back. For now that was enough. 2 weeks passed without a word from Aria. I visited Irene regularly, partly for updates on my daughter and partly because, strangely enough, I had developed a grudging respect for the dying woman. She was still sharp on her good days, still manipulative in her own way, but there was an honesty between us now that had never existed before. She used your doctor's records, Irene told me during one visit, her voice weaker than the day before. Jason's claims about mental instability were dismissed. A small victory, but I'd take it. Has she mentioned me at all? Irene's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. She asks about you in roundabout ways. Wants to know why you've been visiting me. And what do you tell her? That we're settling old scores before I die. Irene's gaze was direct, challenging. Which isn't entirely untrue. I nodded, accepting this. Has she read any of the letters? The ones you kept from her? Irene's eyes clouded. No. She refuses. Says it's all in the past, that it doesn't matter anymore. She sighed, a rattling sound that spoke of her declining health. She's afraid, Donna. Afraid of what she might learn. Afraid it might change everything. It would, I said softly. For both of us. Later that evening, as I was preparing dinner in my quiet apartment, a knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, the shock nearly stopped my heart. Aria stood there, looking uncertain and exhausted. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. So different from the polished professional I'd seen at the house closing. Can I come in? She asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Wordlessly, I stepped aside, afraid that if I spoke, this mirage might vanish. Aria entered cautiously, her eyes taking in my modest living space. The bookshelves packed with well-worn paperbacks, the comfortable but faded furniture, the walls covered with art I'd collected over the years. Her gaze stopped on a small table by the window, where a collection of framed photographs stood. She moved toward it, drawn by what she saw there. These are all of me, she said, picking up a frame that held her college graduation photo, one I'd obtained through a friend of a friend who'd attended the ceremony. Yes, I said simply. She set down the frame and picked up another. Aria at 17, performing in a school play. How did you get these? Grandma said you never came to any of my events. I came to all of them, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I just sat in the back. Or outside. Wherever I could see you without causing a scene. Aria turned to face me, her expression unreadable. Why? Because I love you. I've always loved you. Even when you didn't want me to. She looked away, setting down the photo with careful precision. Grandma's dying, she said, changing the subject abruptly. The doctors say it could be days now. I know, I said softly. I'm sorry, Aria. I know how much she means to you. She told me something yesterday. Aria's voice was tight, controlled. Something I didn't want to believe. So I went to her lawyer this morning and asked him to verify it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. He gave me these. My heart pounded as she opened the envelope and removed several documents. These are letters from the court, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Petitions for custody hearings. Appeals. Dozens of them spanning years. All filed by you. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. You never stopped trying to get me back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. All those years I thought you didn't want me. That you'd moved on, started a new life without me. Never, I managed to say. Not for a single day. Aria's composure cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Grandma admitted it all. The letters you sent that I never received. The gifts. The child support payments that she told me were just guilt money. She looked up at me, her expression raw with pain. She lied to me my entire life. Made me believe you abandoned me when you were fighting for me all along. I took a cautious step toward her. She thought she was protecting you. Don't defend her. Aria snapped, anger flashing through her tears. Not after what she did to us. I'm not defending her, I said gently. But hating her won't heal what's broken between us. Aria's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. I don't know what to do with this information. Changes everything. My whole life has been built on a lie. Not everything, I said. You were loved, Aria. Deeply and completely. By both of us in our own flawed ways. She looked at me then, really looked at me perhaps for the first time. Why didn't you tell me all this years ago? Force the issue. I sighed, moving to sit on the couch and gesturing for her to join me. After a moment's hesitation, she did. I tried when you were younger, I explained. But you were so angry, so convinced I was the villain in the story. And as you got older, I worried that forcing you to choose between the mother who raised you and the mother who had been kept from you would only cause you more pain. So you just waited? Aria asked, incredulous. I watched, I corrected. I kept track of your life as best I could. I celebrated your achievements from afar. And I hoped that someday, somehow, you might be ready to hear the truth. Aria was quiet for a long moment, processing all of this. Then she said something that broke my heart all over again. I used to write you letters. For years. Grandma said she'd mail them, but she kept them. I finished for her. She showed them to me, Aria. I've read every word. You have. Her voice caught, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I reached into a drawer in the side table and pulled out the packet Irene had given me. Here, I said, handing it to her. They belong to you. But I want you to know that they are the most precious things I've ever held. Aria took the packet with trembling hands, staring at her own childhood handwriting on the envelopes. All this time, she whispered. We could have had all this time together. We still have time, I said softly. If you want it. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears and something else, something that looked like hope. I don't know how to be your daughter, she admitted. I don't know where to start. I smiled through my own tears. How about dinner? I was just making pasta. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first real smile she'd ever directed at me. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. As we moved to the kitchen together, the air between us felt lighter, as if the first step toward healing had already been taken. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. 2 years later, I stood on the wraparound porch of the old Victorian house, a cup of coffee warming my hands against the autumn chill. The morning mist was just beginning to lift, revealing the rolling hills beyond the property, and the small lake glimmering in the distance. The lake view had been a dilapidated foreclosure when we found it, A once-grand bed and breakfast fallen into disrepair after its elderly owners could no longer maintain it. Most people would have seen only the sagging roof, the peeling paint, the overgrown gardens. But Aria and I had seen possibility. "Morning," came a familiar voice as the screen door creaked open. Aria joined me at the railing, her own coffee mug in hand. At 35, she looked more like me than ever, though her eyes remained her father's, observant, intelligent, now softened by an inner peace that had once seemed impossible. "Sleep well?" I asked, noting the shadows under her eyes. She smiled ruefully. "As well as can be expected when you're 7 months pregnant." I chuckled, remembering those uncomfortable final months all too well. "The backache is the worst part." "No, the constant bathroom trips are the worst part," she corrected, bumping her shoulder against mine in a casual gesture of affection that still made my heart swell. These small intimacies, the kind that mothers and daughters usually take for granted, were precious to us, hard-won through months of careful rebuilding. Irene had died 2 weeks after our reconciliation, slipping away peacefully in her sleep with both Aria and me at her bedside. In her final days, she had tried in her own way to atone, signing over her modest estate to Aria with explicit instructions that the money be used for something that would heal the remaining wounds. We had talked for hours about what that might mean. Aria was still reeling from her divorce, her career in corporate marketing suddenly meaningless in the face of everything she'd learned about her past. I was retired from my job as a library administrator, with a small pension and plenty of time on my hands. What if we did something together? Aria had suggested one evening as we sorted through Irene's belongings. Something completely new for both of us? That conversation had led us here, to this beautiful wreck of a property that we had spent the last 18 months transforming into a small but thriving inn. We had done much of the work ourselves, learning as we went, painting, plastering, gardening, decorating. Each repair had somehow mirrored our own rebuilding. Each improvement a testament to the careful, patient work of restoration. "Mrs. Wilson called," Aria said now, interrupting my reverie. "She wants to book the Blue Room for her daughter's wedding weekend in May." I raised an eyebrow. "That's 7 months away. We're booking that far out now." Aria nodded, a proud smile playing at her lips. "Word's getting around. People like what we've done with the place." She paused, glancing at me sideways. "They like the story too." The story. Our story. It had become part of the inn's appeal. The mother and daughter reunited after 30 years, building a new life together. We didn't advertise it, but in a small town stories travel. Guests would sometimes ask, and we'd share select details, the telling becoming easier with practice. "Speaking of stories," I said, "I found something yesterday while I was cleaning out that last box from the storage unit." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small silver locket on a delicate chain. Aria's eyes widened in recognition. "My birthday present," she whispered. "The one I never got to open." I nodded. "I bought it for your 5th birthday. Your father promised he'd give it to you." I held it out to her. Better late than never. With trembling fingers, Aria took the locket, clicking it open to reveal the tiny photograph inside. A picture of me holding her as a newborn, my face radiant with love despite the exhaustion of a difficult delivery. "You kept it all this time," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I kept everything," I replied simply. Hope was all I had. She closed the locket and slipped it around her neck, where it nestled just above her growing belly. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you." We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as the sun broke fully through the morning mist, illuminating the gardens we'd painstakingly restored and the freshly painted sign at the entrance to the property. "Second Chance Inn. Have you thought more about names?" I asked, nodding toward her belly. Aria smiled, resting her hand on the rounded curve. "I was thinking Eliza after your mother. For a girl." My heart squeezed at the gesture. She would have loved that. "And for a boy." "I'm not sure yet," Aria admitted. "But definitely not Jason." She laughed, the sound free and genuine. Her divorce had been finalized shortly after Irene's death. And while the process had been painful, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ultimately grateful for the difficult path that had led her back to me. A car crunched up the gravel driveway, signaling the arrival of our first guests of the day. Aria straightened, professional mode engaging. "That'll be the Petersons." They're here for their anniversary weekend. I nodded, finishing the last of my coffee. I'll get breakfast started. You handle check-in. Deal. She turned to go, then paused, impulsively pulling me into a hug. I love you, Mom, she murmured against my shoulder. Even after 2 years, those words still had the power to bring tears to my eyes. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. As Aria went to greet our guests, I lingered a moment longer on the porch, taking in the beauty of the place we'd created together. The path that had brought us here was long and painful, marked by loss and regret in years that could never be reclaimed. But standing here now, watching my daughter, my beautiful, strong, forgiving daughter, welcome strangers into our home with genuine warmth, I felt only gratitude. We had lost 30 years, yes, but we had found each other in the end. And in that finding we had both been reborn. 6 months later, I stood in the hospital room, cradling my newborn granddaughter in my arms. Eliza Margaret Reynolds had her mother's delicate features and, judging by the impressive set of lungs she demonstrated upon arrival, her grandmother's determination. She's perfect, I whispered, counting her tiny fingers for perhaps the dozenth time. Aria watched us from the bed, exhausted but radiant. She is, isn't she? And she has you wrapped around her finger already. I chuckled, not bothering to deny it. That's a grandmother's prerogative. The word still felt new on my tongue, still carried a weight of wonder. Grandmother. A role I had once thought would be denied me, just as motherhood had been so cruelly interrupted. I was thinking, Aria said, her tone casual but her eyes serious. What if we converted the East Wing into a family suite? The inn is doing well enough that we could manage with one less rental room, and it would give us more space for when this little one gets bigger. I smiled, understanding what she was really saying. The East Wing had been Irene's suite at the inn. We'd preserved it almost as a memorial, keeping it much as it had been in the old photographs we'd found among her things. Converting it would be the final step in our journey, a definitive turning from the past toward the future we were building together. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said. A space that's just for us. Aria nodded, relaxing against her pillows. For our family. Our family. For so long, that phrase had been a source of pain for both of us. Now it felt like a blessing, a gift we gave each other daily through the conscious choice to stay, to trust, to love despite the scars we both carried. Later, as I drove home to check on the inn, we'd hired temporary help during Aria's maternity leave, but I still liked to make sure everything was running smoothly. I found myself taking the long route, past the old train station where the Clearview bus used to stop. It was a small, unremarkable building, significant only because it had been my first glimpse of this town 32 years ago, when I'd followed my stolen daughter here, determined to somehow remain in her life even if only as a shadow. I slowed the car, looking at the weathered structure with new eyes. Once it had represented the beginning of my exile, the starting point of decades of pain and separation. Now it was just a building, its power over me gone. I had moved beyond survival to living, beyond hoping to having, beyond the endless reaching toward something just out of grasp to the warm, solid reality of my daughter's love and my granddaughter's existence. As I pulled away from the station and headed toward home, our home, the one we had built together from the ruins of other dreams, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for most of my life. The past would always be there, its lessons and its losses woven into the fabric of who we were. But it no longer defined us. What defined us now was the choice we made every day to see each other clearly, to forgive imperfectly, to love without reservation. What defined us was the family we were building, not from obligation or shared DNA, but from the deliberate decision to belong to each other. And that, I realized as I turned onto the tree-lined drive leading to the Second Chance Inn, was the most powerful rebirth of all.